Hi, everyone. After a 2 month hiatus, we're back with season 2 of Duke's Download. Thank you for joining us, episode 38. And I am so honored that we have, in my mind, one of the true heroes in American politics today, someone who's a real inspiration and role model for me, Representative Daniel Hernandez, who's joining us as our guest today. I just saw he is on, so let me add him real quick. Forgot how to do this, actually. Oh, there we go. Should be connecting. Hello
Hello.
there.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am a little exhausted. Um, so
I can.
yes, so yesterday was not only the end of the quarter, which is our first real test as a candidate for the congressional campaign, but it was also the last day of the Arizona legislative session. It was 171 days when we're typically 100 days. It was the third longest session in Arizona state history. So I kept having to go off the floor to go make phone calls to raise that last bit of money. And it was just kind of insane. And the fun part is my sister Alma and I are both in the state house together. So we get to kind of commiserate and do stuff together. So it was exhausting, but it was a lot of fun. It's just, I can't believe we're already in July.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember doing call time and fundraising for my local race in West Hollywood for city council. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine on the congressional level and being in the state legislature. I mean, I can't even imagine. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me in the midst of all that.
No, happy to do it, especially now that hit our goal for the end of the quarter and we're now not, rushing to try and end the session, get to the end of the quarter. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I was going to ask, out of curiosity, with your sister, I mean, I was aware that she was also a representative, but how long has she been there longer than you? Like, how long have you
So
both served?
I'm a very old 31. I started in elected office when I was 21. I ran for the Sunnyside School Board. So 3 years after I graduated from high school, I actually ran for the school district where I had grown up and graduated from. And then in 2016, I ran for the state house. And it was actually really difficult to run for the state house in 2016 because on top of running for the legislature in a competitive seat to take out a Republican, I was also working full time at Planned Parenthood, running the National Latino Outreach Program and running the coordinated campaign in Colorado and Nevada. So I flew 100,000 miles when I ran for the legislature while working for Planned Parenthood and literally got a blood clot from flying too much. So I literally almost died trying to stop Donald Trump from becoming president and trying to protect reproductive rights. So I joined the legislature in 2017. My sister Alma ran for the legislature in 2018, as well as my sister Consuelo, who ran for a school board. So all three of the Hernandez, as we jokingly call ourselves, are in elected office. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's amazing. No, but what a family.
Yeah.
And no, but speaking of family, I kind of wanted, if I may, wanted to start at the beginning because obviously I already know a lot about you, and I've been a fan and admirer for a long
Thank you.
time. Like I said at the beginning, I was like, you're truly, I think, one of the best people in politics and public service today. So just had to get that off my chest.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been funny because I've been doing this for a third of my life already, and it's kind of incredible to me to see how much has changed in just the 10 years that I've been in elected office. Because when I started, Defensive Marriage Act was still in place. We had the Don't Ask, Don't Tell stuff, and we still had, people not being able to marry who they loved. So in the 10 years that I've been elected office, we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We've seen the Supreme Court strike down not only the anti-LGBTQ marriage things, but we've also seen that now you can have some protections being LGBTQ in the workplace, which is one of my passions, trying to make sure we're protecting our community.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that. I was just thinking the other day about, because I think we're old enough where we've been we had a front row seat to history, where we're actually old enough to remember a time when they used to say, one day it'll be unfathomable to people that gay marriage was at one time not legal. And,
Right.
and now we're actually at that time where
We're here.
18-year-olds.
We're queer. They got used to it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But no, I wanted to ask just out of curiosity because I also, got interested in politics when I was young. I was a page in Congress when I was 16. But I was just curious, like, where did your political interest even come from? And like, what were the steps that led you to obviously intern for Congresswoman Giffords, but also for Hillary, which I also, by the way, was a Hillary intern in '08.
So we can commiserate because there's still an empty hole in my heart where she is not president. 2 cycles.
Okay.
Um, so I come from a completely non-political family, which is really funny. Hey, Fred, good to see you.
Well, Fred's a
Um,
great friend. He's a close friend.
we
And he
went to
loves
Israel
you.
together with a Whiter Bridge a couple years ago.
Right.
But I was 17 and I was in my American government class, and I literally looked around the room while my teacher was talking about the US president. And while looking around the room, I realized one thing was similar in all of the people that were staring back at me. They were all men and they were all white. And I said, that's very weird. So I asked my teacher, I'm like, where are the women presidents? And he said, well, there haven't been any. And I said, wait, our country has had like 43 men, but no women. How does that happen? And he said, well, women have a tendency to be more emotional. They may not necessarily be able to be president. And that just really upset me. So a couple weeks later, Hillary Clinton announced that she was running for president. And I think she made the biggest mistake that any candidate can do. Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't see my sister had joined. She's in the other room. Uh, Good to see you.
We were just
We were just
talking
talking
about
about
you.
you. But with Hillary's announcement, she made the biggest mistake, which I think candidates can do, which is say something like, "I'm in to win." And I saw that video, and it was on YouTube back in the early days of YouTube. So I literally went onto her website, didn't know anything about campaigns or politics, and said, "I want to volunteer." And within a couple days, I had my first phone call from a Hillary volunteer. It was an older Jewish woman. And they said, we want you to come, we want you to volunteer. And immediately I showed up to start working on the campaign, not knowing what campaigns were. My dad hadn't voted in 20 years. He thought that politics didn't matter, that being a voter, it didn't really matter whether or not you voted or not, because it was always special interest in other people who would be the ones that decided things. My mom wasn't even a citizen until 2016. It wasn't enough that I had run for office twice, that she became a citizen. It took Donald Trump becoming president potentially for her to say, I've been in this country long enough, I'm going to finally become a citizen. So I started working on the campaign, and I learned from this group of mostly older women who mostly were Jewish, who called themselves the Yentas for Hillary, how to campaign, how to knock on doors, how to talk to voters. And it was on June 8th, 2008. It was a really upsetting day for me. It was the first time that my candidate lost. It was Hillary announcing that she wasn't going
I
to
remember that
stay in the
concession
race.
speech. I was
And the
crying.
National, me too, it was the National Building Museum. And I was like, how do I get there? How can I go? And I was 18 years old and I was starting college. I couldn't fly out. I literally couldn't afford to fly out to DC. But I somehow felt that my not making enough calls into Iowa and New Hampshire had single-handedly brought down her campaign, and I took it really hard. And I said, I'm never working on a campaign ever again. I said, it's my fault that she lost. I'm done with campaigns and politics. And that lasted about 3 days, as it oftentimes does for people that work on campaigns. Because what I ended up doing was I ended up being invited by the same woman who had worked for Hillary to go work on Gabby's campaign. And right away I said, I'm not going to volunteer. I'm just going to show up to this one event and then I'm done. Well, halfway through the event, I signed up to intern because she was such a dynamic speaker. She was someone who I really appreciated. And I think the really important thing was she was someone that I could touch and talk to and actually see, where Hillary was this like concept and this idea. Gabby was someone who I could literally touch and talk to. And she's always been fond of saying she doesn't do handshakes, she does hugs. So like I stayed up till the end of the event. She came over to me and she introduced herself. And then she's like, let me give you a hug. And I was like,
This was
surprise.
'06, right?
This is
2006?
'08, so
Oh
it
wait,
was
oh wait.
her re-elect because she had
Re-election,
run
right?
in '06 and then her second cycle.
Right.
Um, and I interned for her campaign in
Oh yeah,
2008.
of course it was '08 because Hillary was '08, right? Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Right.
the timeline gets all fuzzy. But I said, I want to get this experience to diversify my resume because from the age of 5, I wanted to go into healthcare to help people. I grew up on the poor side of Tucson. in a largely Latino community. And the only examples that I saw of people helping others were doctors, nurses, and like first responders. So I thought that the only way to be able to do something positive to help other people was by being a doctor. So from the age of 5, I'd been preparing to be a doctor. So I said, I'll just do this internship, and this will just help me get into the process of applying for med school. Like, I'm not doing this long term. And in 2008, Gabby won re-election. It was really positive. Everybody felt really excited. Barack Obama won. And then in 2010, it was like the polar opposite because we had a very contentious and vitriolic election. And halfway through that election, there was someone who shot out the door of her congressional office after the ACA vote. There was one of her opponents had a fundraiser where they shot an effigy of her. So I'm like, this is awful. I hate politics. I'm never doing this again. Again, it's kind of a running theme for me that I say I'm going to quit. And in 2010 on election night, there was another moment that kind of changed the direction, which was I was visiting Gabby in her private suite on election night, and she was on the verge of losing her seat. We had just had a massive Tea Party wave where so many Democrats had lost all over the country. She was not ahead. She wasn't very far behind, but she certainly wasn't ahead on election night. So I went up to her private room just to wish her well and to give her my mom's gift. And when I went up there, she said, you know, it's not about winning or losing. It's about when we have the ability to help change people's lives, we do everything we can to help them. And that just made me break down because here she is on the verge of losing one of the most contested U.S. House races in the country and is not talking about like how she needs to stay in power and how she needs to keep the seat, but instead, okay, if we lose, we have until January 3rd to keep helping people. So she had, I think, really changed the direction of my life because she talked to me about the idea of public service and about advocacy, being the voice for those who don't have the ability to speak up for themselves, as a concept that I'd never even heard about because I grew up in a loud Mexican family where if you're not the loudest, you didn't get heard. So this idea that you could be a voice and an advocate was a new concept. So she was the one who pushed me for the first time ever when I said I wanted to be a doctor. And she said, well, why? And then when I said it's because I wanted to help people, she opened up that kind of new world of advocacy. And I've never looked back since. I've been involved in advocacy since I was 18 years old. I got my first piece of legislation written in 2010 when I was 20 years old and passed out of the Arizona state legislature. So I've been working on policy that's impacting the community that I live in since I was 20.
Unbelievable. And I mean, yeah, but obviously without asking you to recount, obviously, the tragedy that happened, almost 10 years ago, a little over 10 and a half years ago, right now. Yeah. I mean, I remember where I was. I'm sure most people remember where they were when they heard the news. But what I was curious, you mentioned that same year, later that year, after what happened, you actually ran for school board. And right. It's actually quite funny you brought that up, the sort of the theme of not wanting to quit, because I can imagine that after something like that, something that traumatic and that horrifying, that it might make someone say, you know what, I don't want to, why would I want to be in public service or in politics when, these like similarly to the Kennedys, right. when you see that kind of trauma in a family or in the community, it would make to me, I mean, I could imagine someone being like, screw this, I want to walk away from that public life. But I think it's really admirable that even after that, what you firsthand experienced, that you chose to continue. And like, how did you manage to overcome the difficulty of that experience?
So January 8th was a really traumatic day for the entire Tucson community and for Southern Arizona and for the country as a whole. It was a member of Congress being shot. It was 6 people being murdered, including a 9-year-old girl who was born on September 11th, named Christina Taylor Greene. So it was a day that I think really rocked not just me, but the entire community. And I think the first choice that I had to kind of make is, what do I do next? Because literally 8 hours after the shooting, I was getting requests to do interviews. And I always saw myself as kind of a background person. I always thought I'd be somebody who was like a staffer, who was a policy person. And yet here I am 8 hours after one of the most traumatic things that will ever happen, having to be in front of cameras, talking to people about what I just saw. And it was at that moment that I decided 2 things. One, I I needed to do this because there were now 6 people who were murdered who had no choice because they were gone. And I had to be an advocate on issues like gun violence prevention. And for me, it was also, I'm not going to let those people win. This idea that terrorism, domestic terrorism, fear, we just saw on January 6th something very similar happen where our democracy was threatened with violence. And I think the biggest mistake we can do is let those people win and say, we are going to allow them to push good people out of this process. Because I can't tell you how many times I talk to people who would be great elected officials who say, well, because I don't want this to impact my family, because I don't want to be out there in the public eye, I have had countless people who said, I want to run for office, but I can't because of blank. And it's usually threats of violence, having my family or my personal history be out there and be criticized. So what we're doing is we're allowing people to not go into public service who would be extraordinary community leaders because of this fear. And I said, I'm not going to let this fear kind of dictate to me what I'm going to do. So it's cemented in me, one, the desire to be an advocate for those who are no longer able to advocate for themselves. And two, I'm not going to be bullied. I've been bullied my entire life. I'm a young gay Latino in Arizona. I've had a lot of things that have not gone my way and a lot of things that have pushed back on me. And yet every day I get back up because I know that there are kids that are looking up to me and there are people who are relying on me to get up every morning and get stuff done. So for me, it wasn't a hard choice to get involved. And then when there was an opportunity in 2011, I actually didn't want to run for office. I didn't want to run for the school board. I literally waited until the final day for people to turn in signatures to say, okay, I'm doing this. I said, there's got to be somebody better qualified, somebody who's got more experience. And the day before the filing deadline, the only person who had actually turned in their signatures to run was a woman who wanted to fire somebody. And I said, if her only reason for running for school board is to fire somebody, then heck, I'll throw my hat in the ring and I will learn the job while I'm doing it. And that's exactly what I did. So for me, public service and being involved has always been one of those things where it's in my DNA to help people. It's been something that I've done since I was 5, but finding new ways and alternative ways of doing that by running for office and serving in places like the school board and now the legislature and hopefully next in the Congress.
Well, it's a good segue because I was thinking, like, as you said, January 6th, similarly, to run for federal office at a time like this, when things are so, scary and precarious, and, if the Republicans, God willing, the Democrats keep the House, but if for some reason we lose both houses of Congress, who knows what's going to happen in 2024 and with the, electoral college and, but not to get too into that, but I mean, because that's a whole can of worms, but I just,
yeah, we'll have to do a Duke's download on that just alone. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's like, it's just, it's an exciting time, obviously, given that we have a, great president and, but we do have both chambers of Congress at this time, but there's also kind of some dark clouds on the horizon. Right. And I'm just curious, like, what made you decide to run now? And, what are and I want to get into gun control a little bit, but, just on a general level, like, what are sort of the main reasons and issues that made you decide to run right now?
Washington is broken for a lot of different reasons. And I think for me, it's really important that I am fighting to get things done. I have been an effective policymaker here at the Arizona State House, and even before that as an advocate for gun safety and also as a school board member. So for one, it's because I can get things done. As a legislator, I worked with my Republican colleagues to repeal No Promo Homo, a bill that was put into place in 1991 when I was 1 year old that said you couldn't even talk about the LGBTQ community in public schools. So you just pretend like they don't exist. And it was in place for 28 years until I worked with my Republican colleagues and led a coalition to get that repealed. So I did that in 2019. I worked with my Republican colleagues to get $20 million for school counselors and social workers here in Arizona. So for me, I didn't have a choice on whether or not to run. It was really clear because I'm someone who can work to get stuff done, and I'm getting progressive wins in a really red state, which is hard to do. The thing that I always kind of remind people is this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and we're going to have to keep doing this for a very long time. So on all the issues we care about, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's gun violence prevention, these are going to be the things that we're going to have to keep working on for years, and we're not going to solve it overnight. So we need people who are dedicated, who are passionate, but above all, are willing to put in the work. So I decided to run because I know that I can be effective. Obviously, healthcare is one of the most important issues. I was someone who was personally impacted by not having access to healthcare when I was 17. I almost died because I had an autoimmune disorder called Graves' disease. But I talk to people all the time that live in my community who have a health insurance card, and that little card doesn't mean squat if you don't have doctors, if you don't have physicians, and you don't have access to healthcare. So we need to improve healthcare. And in the pandemic, I actually worked with our Republican governor and our Democratic Senator Kirsten Sinema and Governor Doug Ducey to save a hospital in a rural area in my district that was literally 2 weeks away from closing. So it was one of those things where, for me, healthcare is critical, gun violence prevention, in getting people back to work and making sure that it's safe. Now that we are past COVID, we're still going to be dealing with the aftermath for a very long time. And I want to be there to help make sure that I'm being a voice for those who oftentimes can't speak up because they don't have lobbyists. They don't have, big interest groups that are standing up for them in DC.
Absolutely. And two issues I want to touch on. I know I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
Yeah.
one of which is gun control or gun violence prevention, because for me, it's such a straightforward issue. It's like, to me, the fact, it is indisputable that the arguments against it are so, the argument I hear a lot, and sometimes even from people who I would think should know better, but they go, oh well, because gun control doesn't eliminate all gun violence, that somehow that's a reason why we shouldn't put, the fact is, when we had an federal assault weapons ban, but in 10 years, gun violence went down by, I think, 40%. So it is indisputably effective. And, the fact that we don't have a federal response is the reason why people can, go from Texas to California and take, their guns with them, their assault weapons with them. Yeah. And so therefore these state laws don't really work that effectively unless you have an all-encompassing approach. So
you can't have a patchwork and expect there to be a national outcome. And I think that's one of the big things that we have seen states throughout the decade that I've been involved in this issue, like Nevada, where I helped lobby the legislature back before I was a member of the Arizona State House to pass a background check bill. And when the governor vetoed it, we took it to the voters, and voters overwhelmingly approved a background check initiative. So when we're talking about these things, I think it's a really important thing to kind of remember. It's, again, not a sprint, it's a marathon, it's a long-term project. And we cannot sacrifice the good for the perfect. As gay people, we know that change is incremental. Again, we have gotten a lot of things done in the last decade, but it took 50 years to get to the point where we could even have a conversation about, whether or not we were going to repeal things like don't ask, don't tell, and let people openly serve in the military, like having, that Supreme Court decision on marriage or with Obergefell, and also the Supreme Court decision on protections. It took 50 years to get to the point where we could get that done. So it seems like it's moving really quickly, but the reality is, if we look at the history, monumental and important changes take a long time. So that's why when we're talking about this issue, we have to remember that we are going up against a 45-year head start from the gun lobby. The Washington gun lobby, by groups like the NRA, have been doing this for 45 years, where they've been telling politicians, this is a third rail issue, do not touch it, do not touch guns, don't do it, we're going to go after you. So what we need to do is, one, get politicians to understand the issue and to get to the point where they understand that this is not political, suicide to work on this issue, that this is actually a good thing that people care about. But it's taking a lot of time, and we're seeing slow progress and movement. But to your point, we can't just say, just because we're not going to stop all gun violence, we're not going to pass this bill or this law. We need to take every step. And I always try and say, if we're going to lose, let's lose forward. So if we didn't get the massive change that we wanted right now, then let's get 40% and then come back in a year or 2 or 3 or 4. When I was a state representative, we've had a lot of measures that we've been able to kill in the legislature to pass some crazy laws like guns in public buildings. But it's not enough to just kill stuff. We need to start moving good policy. And I did that. I've done it before. And I think for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about this. Because again, there are 6 people who are in Tucson who are dead because we didn't have better gun laws in place. And there are many others. Every day, over 90 Americans are being injured because of gun violence. And that's something that we could stop if we put into place what people overwhelmingly support, things like universal background checks, comprehensive background checks for all gun sales. So we have a lot of work to do. We need to be patient, but we also have to stop giving elected officials and politicians a pass for saying now is not the time. Because when they do that and they say, well, it's too tough, we can't get this over here done, so we're going to do nothing. No, the alternative is not between doing nothing or not getting your way 100%. It's let's try and do something now and then come back and then build on that later.
Absolutely. And I think that's, I think that's you and I share, and this is, I think, a point of view shared by President Obama and President Biden and Hillary Clinton. I think the idea that politics is about the incremental steps, and
Right.
that's the only way that we've achieved real change. It's never achieved in like one fell swoop. It's always
Right.
incremental progress, and that, like
Right.
you
The
said,
civil
perfect should
rights
be the enemy of the
issues,
good.
yeah, the civil rights era didn't happen overnight. It took decades to get to that point. And
Yeah.
then we saw that once one kind of domino fell, others kind of fell in place. And that's, I think, what we're going to see on gun violence as well.
As a final question, and it relates
Sure.
to this sort of the idea, as you mentioned, working with across the aisle with other Republican with Republican legislators, like what has that been like? Because in a state not only on gun control, which is an issue that I'm sure Arizona traditionally has been a pro-gun state, if that makes or gun
Yeah.
rights state, but also like with obviously all this news on like the election audit in Maricopa County that
Right.
I gather some members of the legislature have been involved with. Like, what has that been
Well,
like? Trying
it's
to
a partisan audit. It's the
right,
Senate Republicans who put this
totally,
audit together.
right,
So I am both willing to work with anyone to get things done, but I'm also going to hold people accountable. And I think that's the thing that you cannot just have people, turn the other cheek. When someone does something wrong, we need to acknowledge and we need to have some resolution. And that's why, for me, I work with Republicans in the legislature constantly on issues that are important to my community and to my district. But at the same time, when they're trying to take away people's voting rights, when they're trying to take away people's reproductive rights, when they're trying to make it so that trans kids are being ostracized for wanting to play sports, I'm going to hold them accountable. And like, if you look at my Instagram and my Twitter, you will see all of the times where I will literally go on the House floor and call them out for the things that they're doing. But I think the thing that is important is that we find areas where we can agree and get stuff done. Because if we don't, and if we just let them kind of have full reign, I'm in a state where Republicans have the trifecta. They have the governor, the state house, and the state senate. If I'm not working with them, I'm getting nothing done. So there are times when I can work with them and there are opportunities to get stuff done, but I'm also not going to be shy about saying, you trying to restrict abortion and passing the most restrictive abortion law in the country just to try and challenge Roe v. Wade is wrong. And when you're doing things and you're trying to use one community and pitting them against another, we're not going to let you get away with that. So I think it's important that we find areas to work with our Republican and independent friends, but at the same time, we need to hold people accountable. And if we don't hold them accountable, then we can never actually truly get to a point where we're having conversations about the serious things and the serious work of the people.
absolutely, totally. I totally agree, and I don't want to keep you. I know we're up out of time, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you'd like to share with people how they can support the campaign and
Yeah.
your website and social media.
Yeah, so on Instagram and on Twitter, it's Daniel for AZ, FORAZ. And then if people want to support, the biggest way that they can support right now is going and chipping in even $5 today, if possible, at DanielHernandezForCongress.com, or as the poster behind my head shows, the website. So thank you so much for having me. Hopefully I'll get to see you when I'm in the LA area.
Please, and if you do an event out here, I'd love to be part of it. And also, by the way, I should note that if you're elected, when you're elected, you'll be one of a very few handful of LGBTQ lawmakers, and particularly you'll be one of only one or two um, gay members of Congress of color, right? I think Congressman Takano is, and maybe I think that's
Takano and Torres.
Torres.
But here's the thing. I am running for Congress because I know that I can get stuff done. It's a bonus that
Right,
hopefully when I get there, I will be the first Latino to ever serve this district
right.
as a member of Congress. And I'll also be only the second openly gay Latino in American history. Richie Torres is the first, and I'm proud to have his
Oh, of
endorsement.
course, right, of course.
And he said, I may be the first, but we need you to hurry up and get here. So I'm not the only.
Well, I know,
Um,
and I know Congressman Bowman too, right?
yeah,
So I
Jamal
sorry,
Bowman.
I
Yeah.
slipped my mind, but it was still one of only you'd be only one of what 4 or 5 in the entire Congress or House. So it's pretty amazing.
We are nowhere near where we need to be when it comes to representation of communities of color, communities like the LGBTQ community. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm excited to hopefully join them.
I'm sure you will, and please let me know if I can be of help in any way, shape, or form. Thank you so much. This has been
No, thank
an
you for
honor,
having me.
really, and
No, the
yeah,
honor is all mine, and we'll see you in LA.
absolutely. Have a good day. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.